The hum of the engines filled the cabin of Flight 327, a routine cross-country trip from Los Angeles to New York. The clouds outside were calm, an endless stretch of white against a cerulean sky. Passengers leaned back in their seats, scrolling on phones, sipping coffee, completely unaware that within the cockpit something was about to change everything. Lieutenant Commander Emily Carson, an off-duty Air Force pilot now flying commercial routes for extra income, had been relaxing in the jump seat, enjoying a rare moment off-duty when the first jolt came. Not turbulence exactly, something more sinister, more sudden. Her instincts kicked in. "Captain Reynolds, status check," Emily called softly, glancing toward the cockpit door. Inside, Captain Mark Reynolds' hand trembled over the controls. His usual calm demeanor was gone. Beads of sweat rolled down his forehead and his eyes darted erratically across the instruments. Emily's heart sank. She had flown with Reynolds for months. He was meticulous, confident, never rattled. This was different. Suddenly he gasped, a strangled sound that froze Emily in place. His grip on the yoke loosened, and then his head slumped forward. The plane lurched violently. "Mayday, mayday," the co-pilot shouted into the radio, panic threading his voice. Emily didn't hesitate. Without thinking, she bolted forward, grabbing the yoke, her fingers finding the exact grips as if the aircraft had been hers all along. The world outside the cockpit windows twisted, a chaotic blur of sky and clouds. She could feel the passengers' fear miles away, even though the cabin was a sealed world of oblivious calm. "Listen to me," she barked, voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "Mark's unconscious. I need you to follow my lead. Keep calm." The co-pilot nodded, eyes wide, trembling as he gripped his own controls. Emily quickly scanned the instruments, altitude dropping, airspeed rising. Warning lights flashed in red, screaming their silent alarm. Her mind raced. In training, she had simulated every emergency imaginable, but nothing could have prepared her for the weight of hundreds of lives resting entirely on her shoulders. Every second counted. She remembered the emergency manual stored in the cockpit, a lifeline if she needed to make a split-second decision. Her hands moved like second nature, flipping switches, adjusting throttle, engaging autopilot with a precision that made the plane's violent wobble slow just slightly. But then came another shockwave, a loud bang like thunder inside the cabin. Emily's stomach lurched. The plane had hit a pocket of severe turbulence, violent and unpredictable. Drink carts toppled in the cabin, screams echoed through the fuselage, and somewhere in the chaos, a child began crying, terrified. Emily's eyes flicked to Reynolds again. He was pale, almost ghostly, twitching slightly as though struggling against an invisible force. Time dilated, every second stretched, heavy with tension. She had to make a choice: pull the plane up through the turbulence or risk a rapid descent that could end in disaster. "Altitude 40,000. Maintain. Don't let it drop below 38, she commanded, her voice a calm anchor in the storm. The co-pilot obeyed, following her every instruction with the mix of fear and awe that comes when someone steps into a role they never expected to assume. The autopilot groaned under her adjustments, warning alarms shrieking like banshees. She pushed forward, muscles straining, jaw tight. Her mind raced with calculations: wind speed, descent rate, cabin pressure, engine response. Every bit of her training clicked into place, forming a mosaic of cold logic overlaid with raw fear. Suddenly, a warning light flashed red, a hydraulic failure in the left engine. Emily's heart skipped. She had flown single-engine drills in simulators, but never at this altitude, never with passengers who had entrusted their lives to her hands. Sweat poured down her face, mingling with the tension, but she didn't falter. "Throttle down on the left. Compensate with right. Adjust rudder. Steady," she ordered, her voice unwavering. Her fingers danced over the controls, guided by instinct honed through years of discipline and countless hours in simulators. She was flying on the razor's edge of disaster, Yet somehow, she maintained control. The turbulence seemed endless. Clouds twisted into ghostly shapes outside the window, shadows playing across the cockpit as the plane rocked violently. Emily's mind flickered momentarily to the families aboard, mothers clutching children, business travelers typing on laptops, an elderly man dozing peacefully, unaware that the battle for their survival was happening above them. A sudden jolt threw her forward, chest hitting the console. The plane tilted dangerously to the right. The co-pilot shouted, voice cracking, "We're losing altitude fast." Emily's heart pounded, but her mind sharpened. Focus, control, precision. She yanked the yoke back just enough to stabilize, monitoring every gauge, every dial. A bead of blood trickled from her temple, a cut from an errant lever. Pain? Irrelevant. This was life or death. And then a shadow crossed her vision. Another alert. This time, it was a flashing red indicator she had never seen in real flights, only in emergency simulations. She blinked, heart hammering. The plane's nose had begun to dip toward a rapid descent. Panic clawed at her throat, but she swallowed it. "Brace for impact," she muttered, not for herself, but as a warning, instinctive, as if the words themselves could somehow soften the storm. But just as the plane seemed ready to plummet, Emily remembered one last maneuver, one risky, near-impossible move she had learned during advanced training. It was a gamble, the kind that could either save them all or guarantee catastrophe. She took a deep breath, eyes fixed on the instruments, hands gripping the yoke as if holding the lives of everyone aboard by sheer willpower. And then the unthinkable happened. The cockpit door rattled violently. Someone was pounding from the other side, another crew member, desperate, screaming. But Emily couldn't look away from the dials, couldn't afford to. One wrong move, one tiny hesitation, and it would all be over. As the plane shook and the sky roared outside, Emily's mind made a silent promise. She would not let anyone die on her watch. Not today, not ever. And just when it seemed like the turbulence might finally break them all, the yoke slipped in her hand for the briefest moment. Time seemed to freeze. Would she recover in time to prevent disaster? Or was Flight 327 about to become another headline no one would forget? Emily's knuckles whitened around the yoke as the aircraft pitched violently, a beast of steel and air lurching under her control. The momentary slip felt like an eternity, but she recovered almost instinctively, her hands steadying the plane with a precision born of years in the cockpit. Every nerve in her body screamed in alarm, but she ignored it. This wasn't just a plane. It was hundreds of lives suspended between heaven and hell. The co-pilot, Tom Sanders, visibly shaken, glanced at her. His voice trembled, unsteady yet desperate. "Emily, what do we do? I've never seen anything like this." Emily didn't look away from the instruments. "Focus. We stabilize first. Everything else comes second. Are you ready to follow my commands, no matter how crazy they sound?" Tom swallowed hard, nodding, "Yes." She moved quickly, issuing rapid-fire instructions. "Flaps 20 degrees, engage partial autopilot on vertical axis, throttle up on right engine, keep left idle. Watch the hydraulics. If they dip below 40%, we have less than a minute to compensate." Tom's eyes widened, comprehension and fear battling on his face. 40% minute. "Exactly, move," Emily snapped. No room for hesitation. The plane groaned under her adjustments, metal bending under the stress. Every warning light felt like a screaming countdown to disaster. Then came another jolt, sharper than the last. The aircraft shuddered violently, and the cabin erupted in terror. Screams pierced the air as coffee cups toppled, oxygen masks dangled midair, and passengers gripped armrests, praying to anything that would listen. Emily's stomach churned as she felt the tug of gravity shift unnaturally. She stole a glance at Captain Reynolds, slumped over in his chair. His face was pale, almost waxen. She had no time to check his pulse. Her training screamed that he might already be gone, but she noted the reality. She was in command now, completely, irrevocably. "Tom," she said, her voice calm but razor-sharp, "I need you to radio the nearest control tower. Tell them we have a critical emergency. One pilot incapacitated, severe turbulence, potential engine failure. Do it now." Tom's hands shook as he reached for the radio. His voice cracked over the airwaves. "Mayday, Flight 327, we have a critical emergency." Emily's eyes scanned the cockpit instruments again, altitude dropping rapidly. The plane was losing airspeed in short bursts, each fluctuation like a hammer striking her resolve. She had faced emergencies before in simulators, but nothing mirrored this raw, terrifying reality. The sky itself seemed hostile, a shifting labyrinth of clouds and unseen forces. Then the unexpected, an alert she hadn't anticipated. One of the engines had begun to flame, a thin streak of smoke curling in the distance. Emily's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to think. Flames at 39,000 feet meant a rapid decompression risk, and with turbulence this bad, ejecting passengers wasn't an option. They couldn't survive it. Her training kicked into overdrive. "Engine 2, fuel cut-off, contain the fire. We may have to shut down completely and glide. Tom, prep emergency descent procedures. Stay with me. Every second counts." Outside, the sky darkened as a rogue storm moved in, a turbulent mass that the weather radar had failed to predict. Lightning flashed like jagged teeth, illuminating the twisted clouds around the plane. Rain hammered the fuselage, an auditory assault that made the cockpit feel even smaller, more suffocating. Emily's mind raced. Glide, divert, land. She had to find a safe path through the storm, yet every decision carried the weight of potential catastrophe. Every second of delay could be fatal. Suddenly, a jolt like a punch hit the plane's side. The fuselage creaked ominously. Emily's stomach lurched. She realized the turbulence wasn't just a natural storm, it was tearing at the aircraft, each movement threatening to rip metal and skin alike. "Brace!" she shouted instinctively, gripping the yoke with renewed intensity. Her voice carried authority that seemed impossible for someone suddenly thrust into command, but the co-pilot and even the crew instinctively responded, preparing for the worst. Emily's eyes darted to the emergency manual for a split second, committing a key procedure to memory. Hydraulic pressure readings were dropping faster than she could compensate. She had to act immediately or risk losing flight control altogether. Then a piercing alarm echoed, a cabin pressure warning. Oxygen masks dropped in the passenger cabin. Emily's pulse raced. She knew what that meant. If the plane continued its rapid descent without stabilization, hypoxia would affect everyone in minutes. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She could not fail. She adjusted the throttles, nudged the yoke, engaged auxiliary hydraulics, and prayed the makeshift autopilot setting would hold. Every muscle in her body screamed fatigue, yet she refused to acknowledge it. The storm outside was relentless, the wind howling like a living predator circling its prey. And then came the unthinkable. A violent shudder ran through the plane, accompanied by a metallic snap, a sound Emily recognized from years of mechanical training. Part of the wing's flap system had been damaged. The left wing was compromised. The aircraft could become uncontrollable at any second. Emily's chest tightened. She looked at Tom, whose face was a mirror of raw terror. "We're not done yet," she said, voice calm but hard. "We're going to land this plane, alive." Lightning split the sky outside, illuminating the vast, storm-ridden clouds in an otherworldly glow. Emily's hands moved with precision, adjusting, stabilizing, praying that she could thread the needle through this nightmare of wind, fire, and failing systems. But just when a small sense of control seemed possible, the co-pilot shouted, pointing at the instrument panel. "Emily, radar shows another issue. There's something on our flight path that I can't believe it." Emily's eyes widened as she leaned closer. The screen displayed an ominous, blinking dot, a massive cargo plane heading directly toward them. The storm had obscured it until now. A collision at this altitude could be catastrophic. Time slowed. Sweat streamed down Emily's face. The plane shuddered violently as she calculated angles, speed, and evasive maneuvers. Her mind screamed, decisions made in a heartbeat, yet each carried consequences measured in lives. And then the radio crackled again, a static-laced voice shouting from the control tower. Flight 327, you have a flight path conflict. Immediate evasive maneuver advised. Repeat, immediate maneuver advised. Emily's jaw tightened. The decision before her could determine the fate of every single person aboard. Would she succeed in navigating the twin dangers of failing engines and an oncoming aircraft? Or would Flight 327 become a story written in flames and headlines? The cockpit fell silent, except for the deafening roar of engines, wind, and her own heartbeat. Each beat a drum of fate. Emily's eyes locked on the radar, the blinking red dot of the cargo plane growing larger with every heartbeat. Outside, the storm churned violently, rain lashing the cockpit windows like 1,000 needles. Lightning illuminated the interior in staccato flashes, throwing her sweat-drenched face into stark relief. "Tom," she barked, snapping him out of his frozen panic. "We have to maneuver now. Pull up 20 degrees, rudder right, throttle half on the left, full on the right." Tom's hands trembled violently as he followed her instructions. The plane groaned and shuddered, metal protesting against the impossible angles. Emily gritted her teeth, leaning into the yoke as if her very strength could hold the aircraft together. The cargo plane loomed closer. Its massive wingspan seemed to fill the sky, an iron predator cutting through the storm. Emily's mind raced. At this speed, at this altitude, even the slightest miscalculation could spell disaster. She remembered a maneuver from advanced training, one she'd only executed in simulators. A split-S dive combined with evasive banking. Dangerous at this altitude, but it was their only shot. Emily calculated the trajectory in seconds, noting wind speed, turbulence patterns, and engine thrust. Her hands moved with robotic precision, guided by instinct and fear. "Tom, brace yourself. We're going low fast," she warned. The co-pilot gripped the yoke, knuckles white. This could kill us," he muttered, voice cracking. Emily didn't answer. She couldn't afford words. She initiated the maneuver, pushing the nose of the plane down sharply, banking hard right. The aircraft plummeted through the clouds, wind screaming past like a banshee. The storm buffeted them, shaking the fuselage violently, but the evasive move worked. The cargo plane slid past, mere feet away. The cabin erupted in chaos. Passengers screamed as the aircraft tilted, and oxygen masks dangled uselessly. Emily's stomach lurched, but she maintained focus, forcing the plane back to level. "Keep us steady," she commanded, her voice cutting through the storm like a knife. Tom followed her every instruction, adjusting throttles, flaps, and rudder. Emily's mind raced ahead, planning the next move. One engine was still flaming, the left wing compromised, the hydraulics unstable, but she had to keep the plane airborne until a landing strip could be reached. Suddenly, another alarm blared, cabin pressure plummeting. A rush of cold air hit the cockpit as the fuselage creaked. Emily's heart sank. Hypoxia could incapacitate the passengers within minutes. "Deploy oxygen," she shouted, hitting the controls to release additional supply. Masks dropped into the cabin, but fear gripped the passengers. She could hear children crying, women screaming, men shouting futile reassurances. Emily didn't look away from the instruments. She scanned for the nearest airport, a potential lifeline. Newark was still hours away, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. She needed to find an emergency landing site, any flat expanse that could accommodate a crippled jet. Then came a flicker of hope, a faint clearing on the radar, a sliver of open sky amidst the storm. Emily's pulse quickened. It wasn't much, but it was a chance. She plotted the course mentally, calculating altitude loss, wind patterns, and the damaged wing strain limits. "Tom, we have a gap. Head toward it, carefully," she instructed. The plane responded sluggishly, metal groaning under the stress. Emily leaned forward, teeth clenched, sweat dripping into her eyes. Outside, lightning danced across the sky, illuminating the terror etched on the passengers' faces. Then the unexpected, another jolt. A warning light flared, left engine instability. Emily's stomach dropped. If that engine failed completely, she could lose lift and control. Every decision became a life-or-death gamble. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. Throttle management, right full, left trim carefully. "We're not losing this plane," she said, more to herself than anyone else. The storm roared around them as Emily guided the plane through a tight pocket of turbulence. The fuselage bent and creaked under pressure, windows rattling violently. She fought nausea, fear, and exhaustion, relying entirely on training and instinct. Suddenly, a passenger screamed from the cabin intercom. Is the plane going to crash?" Emily's jaw tightened. She didn't have the luxury of answering with certainty. "Stay calm, follow the oxygen protocol. We're doing everything we can." Another lightning strike lit up the cockpit, briefly illuminating Captain Reynolds. His face was pale, eyes flickering open. Emily glanced at him. He was conscious, but barely. She didn't have time to process it. They had a plane to save. Then the unthinkable. A massive wave of wind slammed the plane sideways. Emily struggled to maintain control as the instrument spun, warning lights flashing in a chaotic symphony of danger. "Brace for turbulence maximum," she shouted, leaning into the yoke. The aircraft rocked violently, passengers screaming. Drink carts toppled, luggage shifted, and the plane groaned in protest. Emily felt every rivet, every panel straining against the storm's fury. She glanced at Tom. "We're almost through it, trust me. One more move and we have a chance." The clearing ahead grew slightly wider, a beacon of hope. Emily calculated the glide path, engine thrust, and wing stability. She had one chance to thread the plane through, past the storm and the failing engines, to reach that small opening that could save them all. But just as she was about to initiate the final maneuver, a new warning blared. Hydraulic failure, aileron control compromised. Emily froze for a heartbeat, mind racing. Losing the ailerons meant near total loss of lateral control. The plane could roll, flip, or spiral into disaster. Her chest tightened, sweat stung her eyes, every instinct screamed panic, but she refused to give in. She gritted her teeth, fingers steady on the yoke. "We're not done yet. Not today," she muttered, determination burning brighter than fear. Outside, the storm roared. The blinking red dot of the cargo plane faded behind the clouds, but the real danger, the crippled aircraft, the failing systems, and the lives inside, remained. Emily's eyes flicked to the clearing ahead. It was narrow, almost impossibly small, but it was a chance. And in that fleeting instant, as the plane rocked and groaned, Emily knew the next few seconds would determine whether Flight 327 would survive or become a tomb in the sky. Time slowed. The storm held its breath. And Emily made her move. Emily's gaze was locked on the sliver of open sky ahead, a thin, miraculous gap cutting through the storm like a knife. Every ounce of her focus, every fiber of her being, was poured into guiding Flight 327 toward it. The aircraft groaned under her hands, metal protesting against impossible stress, engines screaming in defiance. "Tom, we have to thread it exactly. Half degree too far and we could scrape the clouds or stall," she warned, her voice a razor of authority. Her hands danced over the yoke, adjusting in minute-precise increments. Sweat ran in rivulets down her face, stinging her eyes, but she didn't blink. Not now, not ever. The co-pilot swallowed hard, nodding. His hands gripped the secondary yoke like it was a lifeline, and in truth it was. His wide eyes reflected fear, awe, and the faint glimmer of trust in Emily's command. The plane shuddered violently as a rogue gust of wind slammed into the left wing. Emily's stomach lurched. The compromised wing threatened to fail completely. She countered instinctively, adjusting the ailerons manually, nudging the throttles, pushing the rudder, every adjustment measured, deliberate. The storm outside howled, lightning flashing in erratic bursts, illuminating the terrified passengers. Screams echoed faintly from the cabin, some muffled behind masks, others raw and panicked. Emily could hear them, feel their fear, yet her own fear had to be locked away. There was no room for hesitation. Captain Reynolds stirred in his seat. His eyes flickered open, glazed with shock and weakness. Emily stole a glance. He was alive, barely. His pulse was weak, shallow, yet in that moment she knew he trusted her to keep the plane and everyone aboard safe. "Emily, what was happening?" he rasped. "Stay down, we're threading a storm, Mark. Hold on." She snapped, then turned back to the instruments. The sliver of clearing ahead narrowed. She had less than 30 seconds to make the perfect glide path. One miscalculation, one misread, and they would slam into turbulence, or worse, plunge into the storm without hope of recovery. "Steady, steady," she muttered to herself, almost like a mantra. Her hands moved as if guided by instinct, experience, and a raw, almost primal need to survive. Suddenly, a violent jolt rocked the plane. Warning alarms screamed. Hydraulics dipping dangerously low, ailerons compromised, left engine still dangerously unstable. Emily gritted her teeth, forcing herself to think faster, react faster. She toggled the emergency hydraulics, adjusted flaps manually, and nudged the engines, coaxing them to respond despite the growing risk. The plane began to align with the gap, a slender window of calm amidst the storm's fury. Emily's heart pounded, each beat a drum of life and death. She felt the tension in every rivet, every panel, every fiber of the aircraft. It was alive beneath her hands, groaning and creaking as if begging for mercy. Then the co-pilot shouted, "Emily, the wing, I think it's about to buckle." Her stomach twisted. The left wing, already compromised by earlier turbulence and the flaming engine, was at its breaking point. She had to act immediately, or the entire plane would roll, tumble, or worse. Emily forced herself to stay calm, thinking with razor precision. She nudged the yoke, shifted throttle, and manually adjusted the flaps to redistribute lift. Sweat blurred her vision, but she kept her eyes on the tiny clearing ahead. A miscalculation now would be fatal. Lightning struck nearby, illuminating the cockpit in a brilliant flash. In that instant, Emily saw everything: the instruments, the storm, the tiny opening that represented life itself. She swallowed the rising panic and focused. The plane shuddered violently, twisting under her hands, but she pressed on. Hold it, we're almost through," she muttered, almost to herself. Her voice was steady, though her body screamed exhaustion. Time slowed, each second stretching into an eternity. The sliver of clearing was almost within reach. She could see the faint hint of blue sky beyond, a promise of safety, but only if they could survive the next few seconds. Then came the unexpected. A sudden wind shear struck the tail, sending the aircraft into a violent yaw. The nose dipped sharply, instruments spinning, alarms screaming. Emily's stomach lurched as the plane tilted dangerously. Pull up now," she commanded, muscles straining, hands gripping the yoke like her life depended on it, because it did. The co-pilot followed frantically, adjusting rudder and throttles as Emily coordinated the final corrective maneuvers. The plane rocked, shuddered, groaned, and then, miraculously, leveled just enough to pass through the gap. For a heartbeat, silence fell in the cockpit, broken only by the howl of the storm fatting behind them. The passengers' screams quieted, replaced by stunned gasps and whispered prayers. Emily's chest heaved with exhaustion and relief, but she didn't dare relax. The plane was still damaged, engines unstable, and they were still thousands of feet in the air. "Is it over?" Tom whispered, voice barely audible. Emily shook her head, eyes scanning the instruments. Not even close, she said, determination blazing. We've got one chance to land safely, one shot, and we're going to take it. Outside, the storm began to thin, revealing the faint outline of the city below. Newark, an airport, a strip of asphalt that now represented salvation, but also a new set of challenges. The left engine flickered dangerously, a thin trail of smoke curling from the wing. Hydraulics were at critical levels. Flaps were jammed. Every second in the air increased the risk of catastrophe. Emily knew the next phase would be even harder, guiding a crippled, near-uncontrollable aircraft onto a runway amidst storm-slicked winds and failing systems. Every passenger, every life, depended on her skill, her courage, and her split-second decision-making. She took a deep breath, swallowing fear and fatigue alike. Her hands tightened on the yoke, eyes fixed on the runway in the distance. And then, just as the airport lights came into view, the cockpit door rattled violently. Captain Reynolds, struggling, attempted to stand. "Emily, let me," he rasped. "Stay down," she snapped, voice firm. "If you move, we all die." Her eyes returned to the runway. The final descent awaited, a descent that would test everything she had learned, everything she had lived, and everything she had ever feared. The storm had passed, but the danger had not. And Flight 327 was hurtling toward its most perilous moment yet. The runway lights glimmered like distant beacons through the dissipating storm, each one a pulse of hope amidst chaos. Emily's eyes never left the instruments, never straying from the faint, glowing strip ahead. The plane was battered, engines unstable, hydraulics failing, and flaps jammed, but it was still flying. For now. "Tom, run through the landing checklist. Speed, altitude, flap settings, everything," Emily ordered, voice sharp and precise. Her hands moved with unrelenting focus, fingers coaxing the controls as if sheer will could hold the plane together. Tom swallowed, trying to steady his shaking hands. Speed, we're at 240 knots, dropping fast. Altitude, 20,000, descending, flaps jammed at 15 degrees. Hydraulic pressure critical. Left engine unstable, right engine holding. Emily's chest tightened. They had precious little margin for error. A fully operational aircraft would have made this descent routine, but theirs was crippled, fragile, and barely responsive. "Understood," she muttered, jaw tight. "We'll manage, we have to." The city below grew larger, the runway stretching out like a lifeline. But the wind, still strong and erratic, threatened to buffet them off course at any moment. Emily's muscles strained against the yoke, every adjustment a battle with physics itself. Then came another jolt. The left engine coughed violently, sparks flickering. Smoke filled the cockpit. Emily's stomach sank, but she forced herself to focus. One engine down, and they'd have to rely entirely on gliding ability, a high-stakes gamble she had trained for, but never in real life. "Left engine failing," she warned. "Throttle off. We glide, right engine full, keep us steady." Tom's face went pale, but he obeyed, hands moving quickly. The plane shuddered, then began a slow, terrifying descent. Emily's eyes darted between the instruments and the runway, calculating speed, angle, wind patterns. Every fraction of a second mattered. Below, the runway approached faster than she wanted. The cityscape, tiny cars, lights, and streets blurred together, all dwarfed by the enormity of what was about to happen. Passengers in the cabin were unaware of how close they were to death, their panic muted behind masks and seatbelts, but Emily could almost feel their fear, their lives pressing upon her shoulders. "Brace for final approach," she shouted into the intercom, her voice firm yet calm. "Stay down, stay calm, we're landing this plane." The plane tilted as a strong crosswind hit from the right. Emily countered, nudging the ailerons and rudder with the precision of a surgeon. Sparks flared outside the cockpit as the left wing scraped slightly, a reminder of the fragile aircraft beneath them. "Too low," Tom shouted, fear threading his words. Emily's teeth clenched. She had anticipated this. Pull back gently, smooth, don't overcorrect. The runway grew larger, but so did the wind's unpredictable force. The right engine screamed under the strain, threatening to overheat. Emily felt sweat dripping down her face, stinging her eyes, but she didn't flinch. Her hands were glued to the controls, muscles trembling under the strain. Then came the most terrifying moment. A violent gust rocked the plane, threatening to tilt it onto its side. Emily countered with every ounce of strength and skill she possessed, coaxing the aircraft upright, almost dancing with it as it fought against the storm's lingering fury. Her mind flashed to the passengers, the mother clutching her child, the elderly man gripping the armrest, the young couple holding hands tightly. She could not let them down. Not now, not ever. The plane's nose dipped slightly as the wheels approached the runway. Emily had to judge the perfect touchdown. Too early and the engines might fail completely. Too late and the landing could overshoot. She adjusted the throttle, guided the yoke, and prepared for impact. The first wheels touched. Sparks flew. A shudder ran through the fuselage. Emily held her breath, nudging the throttle carefully to maintain balance. The plane bounced slightly, then leveled, the runway stretching beneath them like a lifeline. But the danger was far from over. The left landing gear had been damaged in earlier turbulence. It might collapse under the aircraft's weight. Emily had to keep the plane straight, prevent it from veering off, and absorb as much shock as possible. "Keep us straight," she shouted to Tom, voice almost raw with effort. The runway lights blurred as the plane skidded along the asphalt, smoke curling from the stressed tires. Emily guided it with painstaking precision, controlling speed, throttle, and rudder simultaneously. Each second felt like a lifetime. Suddenly, a loud crunch echoed. The left gear had partially collapsed. The fuselage wobbled violently, sending sparks across the tarmac. Panic surged in Emily's chest, but she focused, holding the plane steady. Every ounce of skill and courage she possessed was tested. Passengers screamed and gasped as the plane skidded along the runway, but Emily remained calm, the anchor in the chaos. She applied careful braking, adjusting the throttle, and slowly, miraculously, the aircraft began to decelerate. The engines coughed, one flaming faintly before finally quieting. Hydraulics groaned, almost at the point of failure. Emily's muscles burned, her vision blurred with sweat and adrenaline, but the plane was slowing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Flight 327 rolled to a stop. Smoke curled from the left engine, the damaged landing gear sagged slightly, but they had landed. Alive. Emily exhaled slowly, shoulders sagging, body trembling from exhaustion. She looked at the co-pilot, whose face mirrored disbelief and awe. Is everyone okay?" Tom whispered. Emily glanced at the instruments, then toward the cabin. "Alive," she said softly, almost to herself. "Everyone's alive." A silence fell in the cockpit, broken only by the hiss of engines cooling and the distant wail of emergency vehicles. Relief washed over her like a tide, though it was mingled with lingering fear. They were safe, for now. Then Emily turned her gaze to Captain Reynolds. He was slumped, weak but conscious. She could see gratitude, respect, and awe in his eyes. He tried to speak, but his voice failed him. Emily didn't wait for words. She pressed the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your pilot speaking. We have safely landed Flight 327. Please remain seated until emergency crews come aboard. You are safe." The cabin erupted in cheers, tears, and applause. Emily's chest heaved with exhaustion and relief. But even in that moment of triumph, her mind raced. How had a routine flight turned into a battle for survival? How had she, suddenly thrust into command, managed to thread a crippled plane through a storm, avoid a collision, and land with failing systems? And somewhere deep inside, a quiet, burning realization took hold. The sky had tested her and she had survived. But she also knew This was only the beginning of questions, investigations, and the weight of responsibility. She unclipped her harness slowly, hands still trembling. Outside, emergency crews were racing toward the plane. The storm had passed, but the aftermath of Flight 327 would echo far beyond the runway. Emily looked out the cockpit window, eyes scanning the horizon. She had saved lives, yes, but the sky had changed her. And it had one final surprise waiting, a revelation that would leave her questioning everything she thought she knew about that flight. The hum of emergency vehicles and the murmur of panicked passengers filled the tarmac, but inside the cockpit of Flight 327, a different tension lingered, a quiet, heavy weight that pressed on Emily's shoulders. The adrenaline that had carried her through the storm and the perilous landing had begun to fade, leaving exhaustion and a gnawing unease in its place. She unstrapped herself from the yoke, muscles trembling, sweat still streaking her face. Around her, the emergency crew swarmed, checking systems, inspecting the fuselage and preparing to escort passengers off the plane. Smoke curled from the left engine, the landing gear sagged, and the flaps were jammed permanently at 15 degrees. The aircraft had survived, but barely. Emily's mind, however, wasn't on the physical damage. It was on what had almost happened, the storm, the failing engines, the rogue cargo plane that had crossed their path, and the inexplicable timing of the turbulence. There was a pattern, an undercurrent she couldn't shake. Something about the sequence of events didn't feel entirely natural. A voice crackled over her radio. It was the airport operations manager. "Flight 327, are you able to exit the aircraft safely? We have emergency crews ready for evacuation." Emily glanced at Captain Reynolds, whose pale face revealed fatigue and shock. "We can," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her body. "Passengers first. We'll follow behind." The cabin crew coordinated swiftly, ushering passengers down the slides, some crying, some shaking, all grateful and awed. Emily lingered at the cockpit door, watching the relief on their faces. Mothers clutched children tightly, elderly passengers wiped tears from their eyes, and young adults hugged each other in disbelief. Each life saved felt monumental. Each life that had trusted her, immense responsibility. As the last of the passengers disembarked, Emily allowed herself a moment to breathe. But that moment was cut short. A shadow loomed at the edge of the tarmac, a federal investigator in a sharp suit, clipboard in hand. "Lieutenant Commander Carson," he asked, his tone both formal and loaded with unspoken implications. "That's me," Emily replied, wary. "I need a statement regarding Flight 327. The FAA has dispatched a full investigation. We'll need your account of the events, the sequence of emergencies, and your actions in command." Emily's jaw tightened. She had expected this, but the formal reality of it hit harder than the storm ever could. Every move she had made, every decision, would now be scrutinized, dissected, and analyzed. The weight of hundreds of lives and the near-catastrophic potential was now under a microscope. She followed the investigator to a quieter area, adrenaline still thrumming beneath her skin. As she recounted the flight, the turbulence, Captain Reynolds' sudden incapacitation, the engine fire, the rogue cargo plane, she noticed subtle changes in his expression. He was listening intently, but there was something more: surprise, suspicion, even a flicker of unease. "You handled the flight admirably," he said finally, "but there's something unusual here. The radar shows irregularities. Not just the storm, the cargo plane's trajectory, the wind's shear patterns. They don't match any known meteorological data. Someone is testing something." Emily froze, heart pounding. "Testing? What do you mean?" The investigator leaned closer, voice dropping. "Flight 327 wasn't just a routine commercial flight. There were anomalies in the system, and your reaction has drawn attention. It's almost as if someone orchestrated the emergency." Emily's stomach churned. She had fought for every second in the air, trusted instincts and years of training. And now she was being told that what she had survived might not have been entirely natural. "Are you saying someone set this up?" she asked, incredulous, the exhaustion and adrenaline mingling with a rising sense of fear. "Possibly," he admitted. "We don't know yet, but we'll be reviewing flight logs, communications, and radar data. You may need to provide testimony to federal authorities, and this will extend far beyond the FAA. Be prepared for intense scrutiny." Emily nodded, though unease gnawed at her. She had survived the storm, avoided disaster, and landed the plane, but now the real storm awaited. A storm of investigation, suspicion, and potential hidden dangers that she could neither predict nor control. As the investigator walked away, Emily took a deep breath, glancing at Captain Reynolds. He was sitting on a foldable chair, pale but awake, shaking slightly. Their eyes met. "Emily, I don't know how you did it," he whispered, voice hoarse. "You saved us all." Emily offered a faint smile, though fatigue and worry weighed heavily. "We did it together, but there's more here. Something doesn't add up." The words hung in the air. She couldn't shake the feeling that Flight 327 had been pushed to the edge for reasons beyond the ordinary. That maybe, just maybe, someone had orchestrated the turbulence, the malfunctioning systems, and the near collision to test her response. And the thought was chilling. That night, as the city lights of Newark glimmered faintly in the distance and emergency crews continued their work, Emily sat alone in a quiet corner, reviewing every detail of the flight in her mind. Every decision, every second, every move she had made. Every passenger, every creaking panel, every alarm. She had survived, but survival didn't mean understanding. She knew the investigation would uncover her heroism, but it might also uncover something far more sinister. Something that would make her question not just the flight, but everything she thought she knew about the forces at play in the skies above. And somewhere deep inside she realized this was far from over. Because Flight 327 had landed, yes, but the storm that had followed it on the ground was only beginning. Emily's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared. "We saw what you did. You handled it well, but know this, the next test is coming." Her breath caught. The message was brief, cryptic, and deeply unsettling. Someone had been watching. Someone had orchestrated more than just a flight emergency. Emily's pulse quickened. The real battle wasn't just in the sky, it was here on the ground, and she had no idea what was coming next. The storm had passed for now, but the real danger was only beginning. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she stared at her phone, the cryptic message blinking in stark white against the black screen. Her body was exhausted, every muscle screaming from the strain of Flight 327, yet her mind refused to rest. Someone had watched her, orchestrated the chaos in the skis, and now was sending a warning, a promise. She felt a chill, an instinctive awareness that this was no ordinary threat. Whoever it was had power, resources, and a deep knowledge of aviation, and of her. Emily pocketed her phone, trying to steady her racing thoughts. The federal investigators' words echoed in her mind. Anomalies in radar, the cargo plane's trajectory, and the storm's unnatural intensity. Someone had tested her. Someone had set the stage for Flight 327 to become a near catastrophe. The next morning, the investigation began in earnest. Emily was escorted to a secure office inside the Newark Airport terminal, where FAA officials, federal investigators, and aviation safety experts awaited her. She gave a meticulous recounting of the flight, her hands steady despite the weight pressing on her shoulders. They asked questions, every detail scrutinized. Engine performance, altitude changes, responses to turbulence, coordination with the co-pilot. Emily answered with precision, honesty, and unwavering clarity. But beneath the questions, she sensed something else, curiosity bordering on fear. "Lieutenant Commander Carson," one investigator said, leaning forward, "we've reviewed radar data, flight patterns, and weather reports. The turbulence you encountered, it wasn't natural. The cargo plane's path intersecting yours at that exact moment, it doesn't make sense. Someone set this up. Emily's stomach clenched. Set it up how? Why? The investigator shook his head. We don't know yet, but whoever did this wanted to see how you'd react. Your skill saved hundreds of lives, but this was a test. A test? The word echoed through Emily's mind like a warning bell. Who would test her, and why? Hours later, Emily returned to her temporary apartment, exhausted but unable to sleep. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, more chilling than the first. Impressive, but tests only get harder. Watch the skis. Her pulse quickened. Someone was taunting her, pushing her, orchestrating these events with meticulous precision, and they weren't done. Over the next few days, Emily dug deeper. She accessed radar archives, flight simulations, and storm tracking systems. Patterns began to emerge, anomalies that could not be explained by natural phenomena. Turbulence pockets appeared precisely where Flight 327 had flown, cargo planes shifted unexpectedly, and weather systems fluctuated in impossible ways. Emily realized with a sinking heart. The Flight 327 incident had not been an accident. It had been designed. But the investigation added another layer of complexity. Federal authorities, impressed by her skill, began offering her consulting opportunities. They wanted her to help identify the patterns, anticipate the next test, and potentially prevent disasters orchestrated by unknown forces. Emily hesitated. Could she trust them? Or was this part of the game too, another way to manipulate her, control her? Then, one evening, she received an unexpected visitor. The door to her apartment clicked open, revealing a tall figure in a dark coat. Emily tensed immediately, training and instinct kicking in. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice steady but sharp. The figure smiled faintly, calm, almost unnervingly confident. "Emily Carson, impressive work on Flight 327, but there's more you need to understand." Her hand instinctively moved toward the concealed pocket where she kept her emergency knife, a habit from her military training. But the figure raised both hands in a gesture of peace. "Relax," he said. "I'm not here to hurt you, I'm here to explain." Emily's eyes narrowed. "Explain what?" He stepped closer, voice low, deliberate. Flight 327 was a test, not just of skill but of character. Someone needed to see how you'd respond under extreme pressure, and you passed. But there's more, and it's coming. The skis are not safe, not for ordinary pilots, not for ordinary people. And now you're part of something far bigger. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Part of what? He handed her a small flash drive. Everything you need to know is here. The simulations, the orchestrated incidents, the anomalies. Study it. Learn quickly. The next event will require everything you've got, and then some. Her mind raced. She was tired, physically and emotionally drained, yet adrenaline surged anew. Whoever was behind this had carefully chosen her. Her skills, her instincts, her courage, they had been observed, tested, and now they wanted more. "Why me?" she demanded, gripping the flash drive tightly. The man's expression was unreadable. "Because you survive, because you adapt, because you make decisions when others freeze, and because the next time lives will depend entirely on you." He turned and left, disappearing into the night, leaving Emily alone in her apartment, the glow of the city below mingling with the storm still raging in her mind. She plugged in the flash drive, her eyes scanning page after page of flight simulations, orchestrated anomalies and detailed observations of human behavior under extreme stress. It was meticulous, chilling, and undeniable. Flight 327 was not a random incident. It was the first in a series, a deliberate test of her abilities. Emily sat back, pulse racing. She realized something profound. Survival was no longer enough. She had to anticipate, outthink, and prepare for the next challenge. Every life she had saved would be at risk again. And then the realization hit her. Someone, somewhere, was controlling the storms, the flights, the chaos, and they were watching her. Every decision, every maneuver, every heartbeat would be under scrutiny. The sky had become a battlefield, and Emily Carson was the only one standing between survival and catastrophe. Her phone buzzed again, another message. Time is short, prepare for the next test. Emily swallowed hard, determination hardening like steel. The stakes had risen. The shadow behind the storm was real, relentless, and deadly. And she had no choice but to face it. Emily sat in the dim light of her apartment, the flash drive open before her, documents and simulations spread across the screen. She had spent the night poring over every detail, every anomaly, every orchestrated event. Flight 327 had been just the beginning. Someone somewhere had been testing her, but why? And for what purpose? Her phone buzzed again, another message. Tonight, be ready. Her stomach tightened. She didn't know who they were, only that their reach was vast, precise, and terrifying. But Emily Carson wasn't a woman to sit idly while danger loomed. She had faced death at 39,000 feet, maneuvered a crippled plane through a storm, and saved hundreds of lives. This was different, but she would not back down. By midnight, she was at the airfield, her military training and aviation expertise guiding her through a careful, calculated preparation. Flight simulations she had memorized from the flash drive played in her mind, the patterns of orchestrated turbulence, engine failures, and rogue aircraft flashing before her eyes. She knew the next test would push her beyond Flight 327, and failure was no longer an option. A sleek black helicopter hovered in the distance, its spotlight slicing through the dark. Emily climbed aboard, heart steady despite the tension curling through her. This was it, the next test. Whoever orchestrated the previous emergency had demanded her presence, and she had accepted, not out of fear but determination. Inside the helicopter, a figure awaited her, face partially obscured by shadows. The man from her apartment stepped forward. "Lieutenant Commander Carson," he said, voice calm and almost chilling. "The next scenario is already in motion. Are you ready?" Emily's eyes narrowed, muscles coiled like a spring. "I've survived before. I'll survive again. Tell me what I need to do." He handed her a tablet displaying a live flight map. 3 planes, all civilian, all in flight simultaneously, were showing erratic patterns. Turbulence zones were forming, engine malfunctions were predicted, and the weather systems, calculated with precision, threatened to trap the planes in a deadly convergence. "You'll guide them," he said, "simultaneously. You'll communicate with each cockpit, anticipate failures, and prevent collisions. One mistake and hundreds die." Emily's heart raced. The scale was unprecedented. She had managed Flight 327 alone, but this was a symphony of chaos. The sky itself seemed determined to challenge her. "Why me?" she asked, voice calm but laced with determination. "Because you can," he said simply. "Because you adapt, because you lead, because others falter where you thrive, and because the storm doesn't forgive hesitation." Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself. She activated the emergency network, linking to the 3 aircraft. Each cockpit was tense, crew members struggling with simulated failures, alarms blaring, engines warning of imminent danger. "Flight 401, maintain altitude, adjust throttle on engine 2 by 10%, flaps at 15, she commanded, voice firm. "Flight 712, brace for turbulence, reduce speed gradually, angle 32 degrees. "Flight 609, monitor rudder, prepare for lateral shift, hydraulic pressure critical." The planes responded, engines groaning, metal protesting, but Emily's guidance was precise, unyielding. She moved between aircraft, eyes scanning the instruments on her tablet, issuing commands faster than most could comprehend. Lightning split the sky across the 3 flight paths. A rogue gust rocked Flight 712, sending the plane into a violent roll. Emily reacted instantly, instructing the co-pilot to bank right, reduce throttle and stabilize using auxiliary hydraulics. The plane shuddered violently, then leveled, a fragile victory. On Flight 401, Engine 2 faltered, warning lights screaming. Emily guided the crew through a manual throttle adjustment, coaxing the failing engine back to life. Sparks flickered from the console, but the plane responded. And Flight 609, the smallest of the three, was caught in a turbulence vortex, spinning dangerously close to the storm's eye. Emily held her breath, calculating wind speed, lateral forces, and altitude adjustments. "Reduce flaps, throttle full right, rudder left 30 degrees, she commanded. The aircraft responded just enough to escape the vortex, emerging shaken but intact. Her pulse pounded, adrenaline a torrent in her veins. The three planes were alive, guided through orchestrated chaos by one woman's instinct and skill. Then came the final test, a simulated convergence of all three planes over a narrow corridor above the city. Any collision would be catastrophic. Emily's hands flew over the tablet, giving split-second instructions. Flight 401, bank left 15 degrees. Flight 712, ascend 20 feet. Flight 609, reduce speed by 20 knots. Synchronize now, steady. Metal groaned, alarms blared, engines protested. But slowly, miraculously, the planes aligned, avoiding collision by mere feet. Emily exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly, but the storm wasn't done. Lightning struck the central tower of the city, illuminating the planes, the storm, and Emily's determined face. She had done it. She had navigated chaos, outmaneuvered the orchestrated threat, and saved hundreds once again. The helicopter touched down, and Emily stepped out into the rain-soaked tarmac. The man from the shadows approached. "You passed," he said simply, "again." Emily's eyes narrowed. "Who are you? Why me? Why these tests?" He smiled faintly, almost reverently. "You were chosen because you rise when others fall, because you command not just machines but fear itself. The world needs pilots like you. Storms like these are only the beginning." Before she could respond, he turned and walked into the shadows, disappearing into the night as if he had never existed. Emily stood alone, rain soaking her clothes, wind tearing at her hair. She had survived the unthinkable, faced orchestrated disasters, and guided lives through chaos. But the message lingered in her mind. Storms are only the beginning. Somewhere above, in the sky she loved and feared, new challenges awaited. And Emily Carson knew she would face them, head-on, unwavering, unbroken. The storm had tested her, the sky had tried to break her, and she had prevailed. But the real battle had only just begun.